I'm Angela.
And I'm Paige.
Join us as we dive into our obsession with true crime, history, and mysterious stories. We'll explore the intricate details of the corrupt, the cruel, and the calculating.
We assume no responsibility or liability for any errors or omissions in the content of this episode. The Corrupt Podcast is based on the facts and our opinions of the case. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome to the Corrupt Podcast. Jack the Ripper is an unidentified serial killer who attacked women in the late 1880s. One of the most disturbing aspects of the attacks is that some of the murders were carried out in just 10 minutes in the pitch-black night of London. A rhyme chanted by East End children summarizes the only thing we know for a fact about Jack the Ripper, that he's dead.
Jack the Ripper's dead and lying in his bed. He cut his throat with sunlight soap. Jack the Ripper's dead. To get an understanding of the Jack the Ripper crimes, we need to understand what life was like in the East End of London in 1888. London was the biggest city in the world. The West End of London was for the wealthy. The East End was a different story. Whitechapel was a rough place in the 1800s with rampant homelessness, disease, and alcoholism. 22% of people in Whitechapel were living significantly below the poverty line, and another 13% were struggling to keep a roof over their heads on a daily basis.
55% of East End children died before their 5th birthday. The children that did survive were malnourished and were known to arrive at school crying from hunger and falling off their seats from exhaustion and lack of food. Clothing the children was considered a luxury, so many children would be going through all seasons unclothed.
If you could afford lodging, the beds were usually rat and bug infested. The staircase banisters had been removed and were used as firewood in the winter. Food was purchased for immediate consumption. This was living day to day. Known as a doss house or a lodging house, you could rent a room for 6 to 7 pence a night. For 1 pence, you could sit on a bench all night, but you weren't allowed to sleep. For 2 pence a night, you could sit on a bench in a row with a rope in front of you and sleep hung over the rope. This is possibly where the term hungover comes from. I'm sure they felt rough after they hung over that rope all night.
And it doesn't even involve alcohol.
Nope. But lack of sleep and exhaustion.
Yeah.
For 4 pence, you could sleep in a coffin with a tarp over it. The coffins were lined up side by side, as many people as they could fit into a room with no privacy. The lodging was just for the night's stay, and the next day you had to go unless you had money to pay for lodging again. There were no exceptions.
There were 233 common lodging houses in Whitechapel with 8,500 tenants.
If you're doing the math, that's 36 people per house. These are not hotels. This is a house with 6 to 7 people per room. Mattresses were laid in the floor in every gap, if you were lucky. Some houses did not even provide a mattress, you just slept on the floor.
There was a lodging house police officer that inspected these lodgings weekly to confirm the conditions were acceptable and there was no overcrowding. The officer always came during the day and the lodging house owner knew the schedule. So the extra mattresses that went on the floor between the beds and bedding were removed for the inspection, then replaced after the inspection. The process was pretty much useless. The slums of the East End were so rough, the police refused to patrol the area at night. The alleys were incredibly narrow and dangerous. They were also dark, like you're in the country pitch black dark. There were no street lamps and people were too poor to afford lighting the homes.
Sex workers were paid sometimes with a stale loaf of bread. Clients paid more for a half pound of cheese than they did for a sex worker. It was estimated in 1857 that 1 in every 60 houses was a brothel, and 1 in every 16 women was a sex worker. That would be 6,000 brothels and 80,000 prostitutes in London at the time. Alternatively, women could shell peas or make matchbooks. These jobs paid up to $1 a day, but the workday was typically 17 hours long.
The Poor Law was introduced as a way to get the poor back to work. Unfortunately, it was proposed as the only way to get aid if you were in poverty. Workhouses were established this way, and the concept was that you had to work in return for the place to live. Some of the jobs were stone crushing, untangling nets, or bone crushing for fertilizer. The workhouses were called prisons for the poor, and it was avoided at all costs. Families were separated and forced to work in different places in the workhouse as a way of forced population control by keeping men and women separate. A master of the house was in charge of food, and all too frequently, they would withhold food from the tenants.
So now that we know more about life in 1888, let's dig into the nitty-gritty of Jack the Ripper. The first canonical murder occurred on August 31st, 1888. Charles Cross, a carman or delivery driver, left his home at 3:30 a.m. Along his way to work, he and another carman named Robert Paul found a woman's body in the street. They touched her face and it seemed to still be warm, but her hands were cold. The woman's skirt had been pulled up and they assumed that she had been sexually assaulted. Deciding to mind their own business because they were late for work, they pulled her skirt down and left her in the street. This woman would be identified as 42-year-old Mary Ann Polly Nichols. Polly was born on August 26, 1845, to Edward and Caroline Walker. Her father was a blacksmith and a locksmith. On January 16, 1864, 18-year-old Polly married William Nichols. In the church where Polly and William were married has a plaque that reads,
Mary Ann Polly Nichols, parishioner of St. Bride's, married in this church January 16, 1864. Remember her life, not its end. Polly and William would live with Polly's father for 10 to 12 years before getting an apartment of their own. During that time, Polly had 3 children, Edward John, born in 1866, Percy George in 1868, and Alice Esther in 1870. In 1875, the now family of 5 moved into their own apartment in South London. Things became rocky when the nice neighbor Rosetta started helping out with the kids. Polly started drinking and frequently fighting with William because, of course, William was hooking up with Rosetta. They had 2 more children together, Elizabeth Sarah, born in 1877, and Henry Alfred, born in 1879.
For the next 5 years, Polly continued to drink heavily, and William continued having an affair with Rosetta. William would say later that Polly left him on multiple occasions, but Polly's father remembers William also leaving Polly to live with Rosetta. Either way, by September 1880, Polly moved out of their apartment and became a resident at Lambeth Workhouse. She left all 5 children with William, since she obviously didn't want to take them to the workhouse. In May 1881, Polly moved out of the Lambeth Workhouse and into the house of an unidentified man. She was possibly working as a sex worker during this time as well. William was required by law to pay 5 pence per week to Polly as a maintenance allowance, which was basically alimony.
I'm interested, did they have child support at this time?
I don't believe so.
Okay. Because if William had the kids, wouldn't Polly be the one that to pay William?
If it was child support, you have to remember this is also 1888, so I believe he was paying her almost like alimony since she's out there trying to make it on her own, and her wages as a woman would be significantly less. Like she had way less opportunities than he would have.
Okay.
You can shell some peas or you can be a prostitute. Like her options were so limited.
We as women are just astonishing individuals how we had to deal with that shit.
Yep. William had Polly followed and found out that she was living a, quote, immoral life, which may have meant that she was working as a sex worker or just that she was unmarried and living with this unidentified man. Either way, William stopped paying his 5 pence per week allowance. Polly appealed with the workhouse authorities, but lost the case when William pointed out that Polly left him, was living with another man, and he had 5 kids at home to raise.
In March 1883, Polly moved back in with her father, Edward. Edward described Polly as a not-sober woman, and this caused them to fight. She didn't stay out late while living with him, but Edward did worry about the type of friends Polly was keeping. Living with Edward was short-lived, and they fought about her drinking on the evening of May 21st, 1883. The following day, Polly moved out of the house and back into Lambeth Workhouse. In June 1883, Polly rekindled a flame with a boy she had dated as a teenager, Thomas Drew. Thomas was now a widower, and Polly was able to move into his home. Polly's life seemed stable for a couple years until 1887 when she stole alcohol from Thomas and he dumped her. This led to Polly becoming homeless and sleeping with hundreds of others in Trafalgar Square. She was arrested in October 1887 for, quote, wandering abroad without any visible means of sustenance.
Which basically meant that she was wandering with nowhere to be and nothing to do.
That's me like 99% of the time.
Just wandering around outside aimlessly. The difference for us is we actually have a home to go back to.
I'm like that chicken Hey from...
Oh, geez. Are you eating rocks too? Moana?
Like my eyes don't go like that far apart, of course, but I feel like I'm just like on the next... Like I just keep moving forward and I just don't care about anything. Just like keep going.
I think we can definitely all relate with Hey.
My daughter just watched this is off topic, but my daughter just watched the movie Finding Dory. And she's like, Mom, it was so good. And I'm like, yep. Did you see Becky? Becky's my girl. She's the bird.
Yeah.
And you think she's dumb because she's not
really
like,
smart.
Yeah, she's not listening to Marlin or Nemo, but then she really does. Like they just needed to trust her. But Becky, she's my girl.
Yep. Becky is the true hero of that movie.
Back to Jack the Ripper. At court the next day, a newspaper reporter stated Polly was the worst woman in the square, and she was very disorderly.
In 1888, Polly had a short stint as a domestic servant. She sent a letter to her father on May 12th, describing the household and her job there. By July, though, Edward received a letter from her employers, stating that Polly was no longer employed and had stolen clothing worth £3 and 10 shillings when she left. On Thursday, August 30th, 1888, the East End was a bit of a mess. There had been a storm in the afternoon that flooded some of the houses along the Thames and left people homeless. There had also been 2 fires, one at a warehouse and one at a dock. Polly spent some portion of the evening at the Frying Pan pub, then wandered to Wilmot's lodging house, but she didn't have the 4 pence to pay for her bed and was escorted from the house. She was reported to have been the worse for drink, but not drunk at that time. Polly turned to the deputy keeper at the house and said,
I'll soon get my DOS money. See what a jolly bonnet I've got now.
Then she walked away. The other residents of the house noted they had never seen the bonnet before, but it appeared to be new and possibly velvet-lined. Polly clearly thought she would pick up a client and be back to Wilmot's in no time, which was something she had probably done multiple times before.
So this was Polly's way of saying she's going to get some money tonight because this bonnet will serve her well as a sex worker.
Definitely. Yeah, like she's got something fancy and nice looking that's going to draw the men in. So she's going to make her money quickly and she'll be right back. Don't give up her bed.
At 2:30 a.m., Polly's friend Emily Holland found Polly staggering and leaning on buildings for support. Polly was so drunk that she could hardly stand, and Emily tried to convince Polly to return to the lodging house with her, even offering to pay for Polly's bed. Polly refused, saying that she had her DOS money 3 times over that day, but had spent it all. Polly told Emily that it wouldn't be long and she would be at the lodging house. Polly staggered down Whitechapel Road and Emily went for her lodging. This would be the last time Polly was seen alive. Shortly after Charles Cross and Robert Paul left Polly in the street, police constable John Neal made his rounds up Buck Row. He found Polly laying in the street. He had been through the area at 3 a.m., and Polly was not on Buck Row at that time. John Neal said,
I examined the body by the aid of my lamp and noticed blood oozing from a wound in the throat. She was lying on her back with her clothes disarranged. I felt her arm, which was quite warm from the joints upward. Her eyes were wide open. Her bonnet was off and lying at her side.
When the doctor arrived, he confirmed that Polly was deceased, but also determined that her time of death would have been approximately 3:30 a.m., the same time that Charles Cross and Robert Paul had found her. This implied that the killer may have been still in the area or on the road with them, but the East End was so dark they did not see him.
At the mortuary, it was confirmed that Polly's throat had been sliced almost to decapitation. She had a deep gash across her abdomen, disemboweling her. Edward Walker, Polly's father, and her husband William identified the body as Polly. According to Lloyd's Weekly newspaper, after William identified Polly,
he came out ashy white and simply said, Well, there is no mistake about it. It has come to a sad end at last.
William paid for the funeral, but didn't attend it. 6 years later, William married Rosetta. Polly Nichols was buried at the City of London Cemetery, but only a plaque remains of her final burial spot.
I have so many questions about this because he paid for the funeral, then he didn't attend it. Then he married Rosetta 6 years later. It took them 6 years to get married.
The kids might have been out of the house by that point, so maybe he was trying to be respectful.
I also didn't understand how he said it had came to a sad end at last. Was William waiting for her death?
In a way, I think so. I think it's like all train wreck situations where you're watching the train derail and you're trying to help somebody, but you can't help them. And in his case, he's literally watching his wife drink herself to death and make all of these bad decisions because she's an alcoholic. And, obviously it's a disease. It wasn't all her fault, but you don't know how many of those years he kept trying to get her back on track, try to save her life. And when I read that statement, I read it like, we tried so hard and this has just come to a sad ending at last.
Okay.
During the police inquiries made after Polly's death, the first suspect emerged. The Whitechapel sex workers told police about a man that had been terrorizing them, and they had nicknamed him Leather Apron. He was nicknamed this because he habitually wore a leather apron. The man had been physically abusing some of these women, threatening them and literally stealing what little money they had.
On September 2nd, the police almost caught the suspect. A woman ran up to a police constable to tell him Leather Apron was in the Spitalfields area, but initially the officer refused to even acknowledge her. When she chided him about it, the officer gave chase and caught up with the man known as Leather Apron. 2 other police constables joined the situation along with onlookers. Leather Apron sneered at the woman, said she had been annoying him, and then denied being this Leather Apron person. Much to the astonishment of the woman and onlookers, the police let the man go. Turns out it was Leather Apron. The Star newspaper published multiple articles that terrified the inhabitants of Whitechapel. Some headlines like, "The strange character who prowls about Whitechapel after midnight, universal fear among women, slippered feet, and a sharp leather knife."
With the terror building and the officers letting Leather Apron go, the Metropolitan Police were feeling the heat. By September 7th, the police identified Leather Apron as one John Pizer, who lived at 22 Mulberry Street. John had wisely gone into hiding as the mobs were after him as soon as he was identified, but this also kept the police from locating him. Jack the Ripper's second victim was Annie Chapman. Annie was born in September 1841. Her father was in the Army, and it provided the family with a stable income and a higher education than many during the 1880s. Unfortunately, Annie's father was an alcoholic and struggled with depression. He committed suicide, and this completely uprooted the family since they now had no source of income. Annie married John Chapman on May 1st, 1869, when she was 28 years old. Their first child was born in 1870, Emily Ruth Chapman. 2 years later, in 1873, a second daughter, Annie Georgina Chapman, was born. Annie was known to like her rum. She wasn't labeled an alcoholic, but she did go to treatment for an entire year. Once back home, she was staying sober and got pregnant with their third child. Around this time, according to a story, John got sick and drank some warm whiskey and honey. He kissed Annie goodbye with alcohol in his breath, and it was all over. She continued to drink throughout her pregnancy. In 1880, Annie's third child was born, John Alfred Chapman. The baby was paralyzed and sent to a home. There's not much more information available on John's condition.
In 1881, John and Annie moved to Windsor when John accepted a position as a domestic coach. Their eldest daughter, Emily Ruth, caught meningitis and died in 1882 at 12 years old. This caused John and Annie to drink more. Just imagine the turmoil little Annie went through at this time. Her older sister died, her younger brother in a home from being paralyzed, and her parents were complete drunks. So sad.
The lives of all the children.
Exactly.
It's really heartbreaking.
John and Annie split up in 1884 or 1885, but he continued paying her a 10 shillings weekly allowance. Annie would also work as a sex worker, crochet, and sell artificial flowers to supplement her income. Annie had 2 regular clients, Harry the Hawker and Tim Stanley. Tim was known around the lodging house as the pensioner. He paid for Annie to join him from Saturday to Monday on a frequent basis.
I don't know what Harry the Hawker does, but that's a legitimate name. Like whatever he was doing.
Yeah, that's like front newspaper article, Harry the Hawker.
Harry the Hawker. He's probably some really suspicious looking guy.
That has secret wings like a hawk? I don't know.
Has a hawk that delivers letters for him? That seems a little intense, though.
On Christmas Day, 1886, John died of cirrhosis of the liver. This left Annie with no allowance and put a strain on her financially. For 4 years, she rented a double bed at Crossingham's lodging house at 35 Dorset Street in Spitalfield.
The month leading to Annie's death is a little hazy on the details. The pensioner had another woman, Eliza Cooper, that he hired as well. Yep, that's where this is going. As can be assumed, Eliza and Annie didn't like each other. Eliza loaned Annie soap for the pensioner. When Eliza asked for it back, Annie wouldn't give it back. She did eventually throw a penny across the lodge table at Eliza to go buy some more soap. A couple days later, both women ended up at the same pub. They got into a fight with Annie slapping Eliza, then Eliza seemed to fare better with punching Annie in the temple and the chest. Just think about the fight there for a second. They were literally fighting over soap.
Yeah, it was a brawl.
Over soap for their shared guy.
I think it was a little bit more on the shared guy part. I feel like the soap was just an excuse.
Probably emphasis on that. Yeah. Annie would spend her last days in pain from the fight. She was too injured to eat or work. There are no records that she went to the hospital for her injuries, but she does have a bottle of medication with her later that would support the fact that she did receive treatment.
At 11:30 p.m. on Friday, September 7th, 1888, Annie asked permission to go to the kitchen of the lodging house. At 12:10 a.m., another lodger has a pint of beer with Annie. He reports that she was pretty lit up at that time. He also accidentally knocks the pills from her pocket, so he uses an envelope to put the pills in. At 1:35 a.m., the night watchman was doing the rent rounds. Annie didn't have the money, but asked for an exception to stay. Even though she had boarded for 4 years and was injured, they sent her back onto the streets to get her DOS money. She told them not to give away her bed. She would be back soon.
Annie was last seen alive at 5:30 a.m. talking to a man. The witness overheard the man say, "Will you?" And Annie responded, "Yes." A few minutes later, Albert Kadosh walked into his backyard to use the outhouse when he heard a woman say, "No," then a thump on the other side of the fence. The noise he heard would have probably been Annie's body hitting the fence. John Davis was a 56-year-old carman who discovered Annie at 6:30 a.m. in the yard at a lodging house. One witness complained they reported Annie's murder to a police constable, but the constable stated he was not allowed to leave his post and to find someone else. The lodging house at 29 Hanbury Street was 8 bedrooms with 17 tenants. The yard in the back had a gate that was never locked, so it was an easy area for people to bring clients or sleep outside. Anyone that knew where the front door latch was could easily access the passageway to the backyard.
This is about to get pretty graphic here, so just to forewarn you guys, Annie's neck had been sliced from left to right down to her spinal column. Her tongue was protruding, which is a sign that she had been strangled prior to her neck being cut. Her abdomen was completely open and her intestines were placed on her shoulder. Her uterus, upper portion of her vagina, and 2/3 of the bladder were removed and never located.
The work was from an expert with one cut of the knife in the dark or early dawn. Remember, there's no lights. This guy's working in complete pitch black.
Annie's death would be connected to Polly's right away due to the type of murder and mutilation. There were no meaningless cuts made during Annie's attack. Prior to Annie's death, an American had contacted a medical school asking for uteruses. He offered to pay 20 pounds each. Another school received the request as well. This caused investigators to wonder if this was murder for gain. 20 pounds is a lot of money to the right person. Annie was buried on September 14, 1888. Her family paid for the funeral, but her remains have been buried over, and the grave no longer exists.
There were now 2 murders. Leather Apron was at large, and the public was starting to demand answers. Some officers dressed as women attempting to lure and catch Jack the Ripper. On September 9th, an angry mob broke out just because an officer chased a man, and the mob thought this man must be Jack. George Cullen, known as Squibby, was wanted by the police for throwing a brick at an officer the prior week. The brick missed and struck a child. When the officer saw Squibby on September 9th, Squibby took off running. It turned into a mob quickly, with over 100 people joining the chase. After they actually caught Squibby and got him back to the police department, the mob kept storming the building. It took hours to convince the mob this was not a Jack the Ripper arrest. Lesson learned here, don't throw bricks, Squibby.
Come on, Squibby. Leather Apron was finally apprehended. At 9 a.m. on September 10, 1888, Police Sergeant, I love this, William Thick. Sergeant William Thick went back to 22 Mulberry Street and knocked on the door. John Pizer himself opened the door. John was escorted to a police station and interviewed. Sergeant Thick had known John for 18 years and knew that he went by the nickname Leather Apron. John denied going by the Leather Apron alias, saying he had never been called Leather Apron before that morning. The Mulberry Street house was searched. 5 knives were found, but none appeared to be the murder weapon. John also had an alibi for both nights of the murders. John was released from jail on September 11th, and police confirmed he wasn't their man. On September 27, 1888, the London Central News received a letter addressed to the Boss Central News Office, London City. Known as the Dear Boss letter, it would be the first time the killer would be referred to as Jack the Ripper. Prior to the letter, he had been known as the Whitechapel Murderer, Red Fiend, or Leather Apron. The letter, envelope, and its seal remain today. If you want to look up the actual letter, it reads,
Dear Boss, I keep on hearing the police have caught me, but they won't fix me just yet. I have laughed when they look so clever and talk about being on the right track. That joke about Leather Apron gave me real fits. I am down on whores and shan't quit ripping them till I do get buckled. Grand work the last job was. I gave the lady no time to squeal. How can they catch me now? I love my work and want to start again. You will soon hear of me with my funny little games. I saved some of the proper red stuff in a ginger beer bottle over the last job to write with, but it went thick like glue, and I can't use it. Red ink is fit enough, I hope, haha. The next job I do, I shall clip the lady's ear off and send to the police officers just for jolly, wouldn't you? Keep this letter back till I do a bit more work, then give it out straight. My knife's so nice and sharp, I want to get to work right away if I get a chance. Good luck. Yours truly, Jack the Ripper. Don't mind me giving the trade name. Wasn't good enough to post this before I got all the red ink off my hands. Curse it, no luck yet. They say I'm a doctor now, haha.
I just want to imagine these officers' faces, like when they're reading this letter. They're probably like, what the hell is happening right now? What the hell is this letter?
There's a lot to examine in the letter if you take it seriously. That he kept some of the blood, put it in a ginger beer bottle, and then it went thick like glue. That he cut off a lady's ear. There's just so much. Even my knife's so nice and sharp. And we know that's pretty legitimate because the cuts that were made were one smooth motion by somebody who knows what they're doing.
Yeah, I don't understand, like, him saying, I am down on whores, and I shan't quit ripping them till I do get buckled. What does get buckled mean?
I would assume get buckled is like getting caught.
Okay. See, this is why I need you.
Teamwork makes the dream work.
The letter was held by the Central News for 2 days because they thought it was a joke. On the weekend of September 29th, it was delivered to Chief Constable Williamson at Scotland Yard.
The police were skeptical about the letter, and they thought it was a hoax. The letter was written in red ink, and it was noted to be from an educated hand. The use of boss was also an American word, which may be a clue. Feeling that journalists may have written the letter, The investigators were forced to take the letter seriously when 2 more attacks occurred the following night. September 30th, 1888 would become known as the double event. 2 murders would occur not only in the same night, but within an hour of each other. Elizabeth Gustafsdotter was born in Sweden on November 27, 1843. Liz worked as a domestic servant for a couple of years before registering as a prostitute in Sweden in 1865. That same year, she gave birth to a stillborn daughter. There's quite a bit to unpack in the beginning of Liz's story. Sweden allowed Liz to work as a registered sex worker, but did require regular doctor visits and basic STD testing. The death of her daughter was devastating to Liz, and she decided to move to London. She sailed there in July 1866.
Less than a year later, Liz would marry John Stride on March 7, 1869. They opened and ran a coffee shop together until it was sold in 1875. Liz also received the nickname Long Liz. This was a common nickname for people with the last name because then they went by Long Stride. At some point around 1875, Liz and John's marriage falls apart. In 1877, Liz was sent to a workhouse, but the reason for the punishment is unknown.
On September 3, 1878, 2 boats collided on the Thames. Known as the Princess Alice disaster, at least 650 people would die when the Bywell Castle ship struck the Princess Alice boat. The Princess Alice cracked in half and sank within minutes. This is where Liz comes in, but not in a good way, unfortunately. She claimed that herself, her husband, and 2 of her children had been on board the Princess Alice in an attempt to get financial aid from the Swedish church for her husband and children's death. She even claimed that 5 of her missing teeth on her left lower jaw were due to another passenger kicking her in the mouth during the escape from the boat. It has been confirmed that Liz was not on the boat. John lived several more years and died in 1884. The church also saw through her lie and she was denied financial assistance. I think this shows how desperate she really was for financial assistance, though.
Did she even have any children? This seems like a stretch.
No.
Yeah, okay. It seems like a stretch for her to say. But, desperate times call for desperate measures.
And she had been to the Swedish church in London before and received financial assistance, so they probably knew her and knew that she didn't even have any children, that she was just trying to get any kind of payout or money that she could.
In 1885, Liz was in a relationship with Michael Kidney. Michael was a waterside laborer transferring cargo between the ships. They lived together on and off for 3 years, but it wasn't an easy relationship. Liz's drinking was a problem, and Michael was abusive.
At one time, Michael attempted to padlock Liz in their room.
Maybe so she wouldn't drink anymore?
I'm really not sure what reason he could possibly come up with to padlock another human in a room.
But he was abusive, so he probably was also mentally...
keeping her in.
Yeah, keeping her in. In April 1887, Liz charged Michael with assault, but didn't turn up at the hearing. In the 20-month period before her death, she would be charged with drunk and disorderly conduct 8 separate times. On Tuesday, September 25, 1888, Michael would see Liz for the last time. Michael stated that Liz was drunk, but he expected her back when he got off work. Liz, however, went to the lodging house at 32 Flower and Dean Street, saying that she had been in another fight with Michael. She requested a room and was able to work cleaning rooms at the lodging house.
Liz would spend the last days of her life cleaning and living at the lodging house. On September 30th, she cleaned 2 rooms during the day and was paid 6 pence. At 6:30 p.m., Liz was seen drinking at the Queen's Head Public House. Between 7 and 8 p.m., Liz went back to the lodging house for a clothes brush. She was cheerful and headed back out for more drinking. At 11 p.m., 2 men saw Liz with a short man who had a dark mustache but sandy eyelashes. One of the men, Mr. Best, said,
"It was raining very fast and they did not appear willing to go out. He was hugging and kissing her, and as he seemed a respectably dressed man, we were rather astonished at the way he was going on at the woman."
Liz and the man stood in the doorway of the pub, hugging and kissing until the 2 men started calling out to them. Then they left the pub and headed out into the rain.
At 11:45 p.m., another man saw Liz and this man kissing in another doorway. This witness overhears the man tell Liz,
"You would say anything but your prayers." The man overhearing the exchange took the situation as Liz was making an excuse not to have sex with this man.
At 12 a.m., Matthew Packer claims to have sold Liz and this mystery man some grapes. It's possible that this witness did not actually see Liz, but another woman. His story changes several times in the newspapers, and Liz didn't have grapes in her stomach at the time of her death. He may have made up the story in an attempt to get the reward money for any information on Jack the Ripper. Queen Victoria did not pitch in for this reward, even though it was requested multiple times. Instead, she sent a letter to the detectives of Scotland Yard, pointing out the deficiencies in the Metro Police and recommending the courts of the East End be lit at night.
It's not a good look for Victoria. She basically grumbled and judged them, but they didn't exactly have the resources to correct those deficiencies or light up the East End. 35 minutes later, Liz would be spotted again, this time by Police Constable William Smith. He saw Liz with a young man, approximately 28 years old, with a dark coat and a hard deerstalker hat. This man was also carrying a package wrapped in newspaper. At approximately 12:45 a.m., a man named Israel Swartz witnessed an altercation in the streets. Swartz saw a man throw a woman who looked like Liz down in the street. The woman screamed 3 times in pain, but not loud enough to draw attention to herself. According to Swartz, the attacker then looked across the street to another man lighting a pipe and called out, "Lipsky." Swartz got the impression that these two men knew each other, so he turned to leave, but found the pipe-smoking man was following him. Swartz ran away and lost his follower, but did later identify the woman he saw being thrown to the ground as Liz. Something else to note is that Mr. Swartz's description of the man and Police Constable William Smith's description are very different. Both identified Liz, but the description of the man is up for debate.
The police did accept Schwartz's account and considered him to be a credible witness, which meant that he was one of the few to see a Jack the Ripper attack. The police had one clue to go on: Lipsky. It's possible that Schwartz misheard what the attacker yelled in the stress of the moment, and the man had shouted "Lizzie" instead. However, a year earlier, in a road over from Liz's attack, there was a murder by a man named Israel Lipsky. Lipsky was a Polish Jew that had murdered a woman named Angel by pouring nitric acid down her throat. It was a well-publicized case as Lipsky was hanged for the attack.
The people in the area were using it as slang when talking to women, almost as, "Be careful or I'll Lipsky you." Ick.
Should bring that back. Be careful or I'll Lipsky you.
Yeah, but not to just women.
Yeah, not to just women, no.
Also, that's a pretty rough threads. Be careful or I'm going to pour nitric acid down your throat. That's a rough threads.
It is. There was a wave of anti-Semitism going through London at the time as well. So it's just as possible that the attacker yelled Lipsky as a type of insult to the other man by a way of calling him a Jew. At 1 a.m., the body of Elizabeth Stride was discovered in Dutfield's yard. She was 45 years old with a light complexion, gray eyes, brown curly hair, and was about 5 foot 5 inches tall.
The International Working Men's Educational Club was adjacent to Dutfield's yard. It was so dark outside that only 18 foot or so from the door of the club was visible. Everything else was pitch black. Several people came and went from the club between 12:30 to 12:40 a.m., but they saw and heard nothing. At 1 a.m., the club steward, Louis Demsch, or Louis Demschutz, depending on which source you use, arrived on his wagon. He only saw something on the ground when his pony stepped left around it. He lit a match to confirm it was a woman leaning on the wall, but it was another wet night in the East End, and the match blew out right away. Louis ran to the club, where several members joined him outside with a lantern. At that point, blood could also be seen on the ground next to the woman, and the police were notified.
Dr. Frederick Blackwell arrived at the scene by 1:16 a.m.
Surprisingly fast for no phones or 911. That's only 16 minutes.
Way to go, Dr. Blackwell. Based on his report, Liz's legs were drawn up with her feet against the right side of the passage. Her neck, legs, and face were still warm, but her hands were cold. Her right hand was open and lying on her chest. Liz's left hand was holding a packet of cashews.
These are like lozenges to cover bad breath. So basically, an 1800s version of a breath mint.
Liz had tied a scarf around her neck that evening, but it appeared to have been pulled tight and to the left, implying the murderer had pulled her back by it. There was a parallel cut running in line with the top of the scarf from the left to the right. This cut severed her windpipe in two. Liz had bled out in the street but was unable to call out for help. Dr. Blackwell noted that her wounds were beyond self-infliction.
On her person were her only belongings: long black cloth jacket, fur trimmed around the bottom with a red rose and white maiden hair fern pinned to it. She was not wearing flowers when she left the lodging house, though.
Do we know where the flowers were on her?
I think they were supposed to be on her jacket, like they got pinned on her jacket.
Okay, so Jack the Ripper pinned her flowers on her jacket.
Maybe, or she met up with somebody after she left the lodging house and they gave her flowers, or maybe that man bought her flowers.
Okay.
But either way, the flowers came from an unknown place or source. So we know she had on this long cloth jacket. She also had a black skirt, a black crepe bonnet, a checked neck scarf knotted on the left side, dark brown velveteen bodice, 2 light serge petticoats, a white chemise, white stockings, spring-sided boots, 2 handkerchiefs, one, the larger, is noted at the postmortem to have fruit stains on it, a thimble, a piece of wool wound around a card, a key as if from a padlock, a small piece of lead pencil, 6 large and 1 small button, a comb, a broken piece of comb, a metal spoon, a hook as if from a dress, a piece of muslin, and 1 or 2 small pieces of paper. That's it. That's all the worldly possessions that 45-year-old Liz owned. She was truly living day to day. Also, she had the key to a padlock in her possession, and it had been reported that Michael had locked her in a room. I feel like she had that key because she had recently got out of that locked room.
Yeah, totally. Liz's time of death would be estimated between 12:36 a.m. to 12:56 a.m. Liz was not mutilated, almost as if Jack had been interrupted or possibly that her murder wasn't by Jack the Ripper. Schwartz's eyewitness account was accepted by the police, so maybe he saw Michael Kidney beating Liz, then he murdered her. Or maybe Jack's attack was interrupted and he didn't have time to mutilate her.
Sadly, we'll probably never know.
She was buried on October 6th, and her grave remains today at the East London Cemetery. It wouldn't be long before Jack the Ripper's second attack of the night. 45 minutes later, at 1:45 a.m., the body of Catherine Eddowes would be found.
Catherine was born on April 14, 1842. At the time of her death, she was 5 foot tall, with hazel eyes and dark auburn hair. She also had a tattoo on her left forearm in blue ink that read TC. Her father was a tin plate worker. She attended school until 1855 when her mother died. At that time, she was taken in by an aunt and continued school for a bit, but by 1861 or 1863, she left home to be with Thomas Conway, a man she was involved with. Thomas had a pension from his time in the Army, and you might have guessed it, but the TC tattoo on her arm was for Thomas Conway.
I wonder if Thomas did that to her, or she was in love with him and she wanted it.
She was in love with Thomas.
Okay.
So I think she actually got that herself.
Okay.
This was one of those first tattoos where, they tattoo their significant other's name on themselves.
Yeah.
I didn't know this was happening in the 1800s, but apparently it was. She was a trendsetter.
Friends say that Catherine was an intelligent woman with a fiery temper. Thomas and Catherine traveled around different towns selling gallows ballads. A gallows ballad was a one piece of paper that details the crime of the condemned person. They make an okay living on this until executions were banned, then the money ran out pretty quickly. It doesn't appear that Thomas and Catherine were ever married, but they did have 3 children together. Annie was born in 1865, George in approximately 1868, and another son in 1873. Thomas and Catherine split up in 1881. Catherine kept Annie and one of the boys. Thomas took custody of the other boy. The same year, Catherine met John Kelly. Catherine's daughter, Annie, got married and moved around to avoid her mother's constant request for money. Money was incredibly tight for Catherine and John. She never married John, but she did take his name occasionally, going by Kate Kelly. Catherine was known to sometimes drink heavily, but it wasn't a habit of hers.
Every year, John and Catherine would walk to Kent to pick hops.
What the heck is a hop?
Like a beer hop. It's the plant that they would pick that goes into beer, to make beer, I guess.
Okay.
This would be a 30 to 40 mile walk that would take days from London to Kent. Unfortunately, the hop season and picking was unsuccessful for them in 1888. By the time they walked to Kent and then back to London, they were broke. They had no money for lodging. So on Friday, September 29th, they split up, with John staying at Cooney's lodging house and Catherine staying at the casual ward. John pawned a pair of boots that he had, and they met up for breakfast the next morning. By the afternoon, they had no money again, so Catherine set out to find her daughter Annie to try and get some money from her. By 8 p.m., Catherine was found lying in a heap on the pavement drunk. She was booked at the police station at 8:45. She refused to give her name, providing her name only as nothing. She slept until 12:15, when she was heard singing softly to herself. At 12:30 a.m., she called out asking when she would be released, and 20 minutes later at 12:55 a.m., she was deemed sober and released from the jail. She provided her name at that time as Mary Ann Kelly, living at 6 Flower Street. At 1 a.m., she leaves the police station in a good mood, saying, "Good night, old cock," and heading in the direction of Mitre Square. The walk should have taken her 10 minutes, which leaves a 30-minute gap from the time when she left the police department to when her body was discovered.
At 1:45 a.m., Police Constable Edward Watkins found Catherine's body in Mitre Square. Watkins was walking his 15-minute police route in the neighborhood and had just passed through at 1:30 a.m., but Mitre Square was deserted at that time. In a dark corner laid Catherine's body just 15 minutes later. Dr. Frederick Gordon Brown, a surgeon, arrived at 2 a.m. He estimated that Catherine had been dead less than 30 minutes when her body was discovered. Like the other women, Catherine's throat had been cut. Her cause of death was a hemorrhage from the left common carotid artery, with mutilations occurring post-mortem. Her intestines were pulled out and laid on her right shoulder, with 2 foot of it laying by the left arm. There was no blood on the front of her clothes or signs of spurting blood on the bricks or pavement around her body. Her face was severely mutilated. There was 1/4 inch cut in her left eyelid and a 1/2 inch cut on her right eyelid. The tip of the nose had been removed. The skin on her cheek was peeled up and a portion of her ear cut off. The abdomen was cut and the liver stabbed with a sharp-pointed instrument like a knife. Her left kidney and uterus had been removed. Dr. Brown said in his report,
The throat had been so instantly severed that no noise could have been emitted. I should not expect much blood to have been found on the person who inflicted these wounds. These wounds could not have been self-inflicted.
Dr. Brown also theorized that Catherine had been laying down at the time of the attack. Like Polly Nichols, Annie Chapman, and Liz Stride, Catherine Eddowes' murderer had surgical skill.
The removal of Catherine's nose may have been a statement about her lifestyle by the murderer. Many people, and especially sex workers, lost their nose due to syphilis. Silver prosthetic nose tips or nose covers that were worn over the ears like glasses could cover the nose. Removing Catherine's nose may have been a way to mark her as a prostitute. She was the first victim to suffer facial mutilations. Part of Catherine's apron had been sliced off during the attack. It was found on Goulston Street in a stairway. The piece found had blood and fecal matter on it. The murderer may have wiped his knife on the apron piece and then left it as trash in the stairway. The design on the apron with Catherine and the piece found matched. Another piece of evidence, though controversial, was discovered that night. In the same stairway that the apron piece was found, there was a white chalk message on the black bricks. The message read,
"The Jews, Juwes, are the men that will not be blamed for nothing."
Different officers wrote down different spelling. The first officer spelled the word Jews, Juews. The following officer went Jewes. Either way, the implication was that the writer had possibly misspelled the word Jews. The neighborhood was predominantly Jewish, and the officers became worried for the community's safety. A photographer was requested, but before they arrived, the message was erased. This chose to be quite the error, and there has been lots of discussion on the graffiti. Some feel the graffiti was written by Jack the Ripper after he threw down the apron in the stairway. Others noted that the chalk appeared to be aged and had already been there when Jack threw the apron piece down.
The attack led investigators to believe the Dear Boss letter might have been legitimate due to the line, "The next job I do, I shall clip the lady's ears off." Catherine was buried in an unmarked grave in City of London Cemetery on October 8, 1888. Hundreds of people, mostly from the East End, attended the funeral. The caretaker also paid for her funeral. In 1996, her grave was marked with a plaque. Catherine's death certificate lists her as Catherine Eddowes, otherwise Catherine Conway, or otherwise Catherine Kelly. On Monday, October 1st, a postcard would be received by the Central News Agency. This postcard was of similar handwriting, also in red ink, but appeared to have blood smeared on the page. The postcard read,
"I was not codding dear old boss when I gave you the tip. You'll hear about Saucy Jack's work tomorrow. Double event this time, number one squealed a bit, couldn't finish straight off. Had not the time to get ears for police. Thanks for keeping the last letter back till I got to work again. Jack the Ripper."
This mailing is called the Saucy Jack postcard. It was made public on October 1st along with the Dear Boss letter. Everyone had an opinion on if the first two letters were a hoax or the writings of a madman, or both. Then another letter was received.
George Lusk had been in the news for his vigilante patrols on the hunt for Jack. This drew the wrong type of attention to George, and he had some pretty creepy characters track him down. On October 12th, he received a letter that was very similar to the Dear Boss letter. It read,
"I write you a letter in black ink, as I have no more of the right stuff. I think you are all asleep in Scotland Yard with your bloodhounds, as I will show you tomorrow night, Saturday. I am going to do a double event, but not in Whitechapel. Got rather too warm there. Had to shift. No more till you hear me again. Jack the Ripper." Then on October 16th, George received the infamous From Hell letter and a piece of a kidney from Jack. The letter read,
"From Hell, Mr. Lusk. Sir, I send you half the kid I took from one woman, preserved it for you, t'other piece I fried, and ate it. It was very nice. I may send you the bloody knife that I took it out if you only wait a while longer. Signed, Catch Me When You Can, Mr. Lusk."
George assumed the letter and kidney were a prank at first. After multiple doctors looked at the kidney, it was confirmed as human. One doctor thought it was possibly the kidney of an alcoholic who was 45 years old. Another doctor would disagree, saying the kidney was clearly Catherine's kidney. It's also possible that the kidney and letter were a prank from a medical student. It was never determined to be or not Catherine's missing kidney.
In 2018, a handwriting expert reviewed the correspondence that was linked to Jack. It was found that the Dear Boss letter and the Saucy Jack postcard have similar handwriting. Both letters also use the phrase, "to keep back." By October, women were arming themselves and men were lurking in alleyways hoping to be the one to catch Jack the Ripper. There would be no murders that month, but the fifth and last murder would be coming on November 9, 1888. Mary Jane Kelly was the youngest victim, at approximately 25 years old. She was born around 1863 and had 6 or 7 siblings.
In 1879, she married a man named Davies, but he died just a couple of years later in an explosion. In 1884, Mary moved to London and worked in a high-end brothel. She met Joseph Barrett in 1887 and after only a week of knowing each other, decided to live together. They teamed up for the next year and 8 months, moving several times but lodging together. In early 1888, they began renting a room at a lodging house at 13 Miller's Court. Neither Joseph or Mary drank excessively, though when Mary drank, she was known to be a mean drunk and it caused them to argue. During one of the arguments, Joseph hit a window and left a fist-sized hole in it. They got along until October 30th when the room became a little cramped for Joseph. Mary had invited another sex worker to live with them. The room was very cramped, and all three had to share the bed.
Joseph moved out, and Mary, who was already behind in the rent, started to sink faster. She continued working as a sex worker, but was very nervous about the murders. Joseph saw Mary on November 8th to apologize for not having any money to help her for the rent. The other woman appears to have moved out, and Mary was staying by herself in the room. At 12 a.m. on November 9th, Mary was seen at Miller's Court with a stout man wearing a longish, shabby dark coat and a black billycock hat. Mary was singing and continued singing around 1 a.m. according to witnesses.
At 3:30 a.m., two neighbors of Mary overheard a woman cry, "Oh, murder." There was no other sound, and the cry was disregarded. At 10:45 a.m., the landlord sent his assistant to Mary's room to collect the rent. He knocked twice on the door, but did not receive an answer. The man then went to a broken window to peer in and saw the body of Mary Jane Kelly lying on the bed. Mary was the most mutilated of the canonical five. It's estimated that because this was the only murder to occur indoors, he had spent 2 hours on the attack.
When the doctor arrived at 11:15, they had to wait because the door was locked. It wouldn't be until 1:30 p.m. when the door was broken down that the full extent of the murder was evaluated. Interestingly, minimal information was known about her injuries, with only photographs remaining because the notes taken by Dr. Thomas Bond suspiciously disappeared and then were anonymously returned to Scotland Yard in 1987. The report stated that her throat had been cut down to the spinal column. Her nose, cheeks, eyebrow, and ears were all partially removed. The uterus, kidneys, and one breast was placed under her head. The other breast was at her right foot, and the liver was between her feet. Mary's heart had been removed during the attack. Some reports list it as missing, and others say it was removed but still in the room. There's just not enough information remaining to know what the truth is. Mary was possibly asleep when she was strangled to death, but there's also cuts on her thumb and hands indicating she tried briefly to fight off her attacker. Women's clothing were found in her fireplace. Mary's clothes were still in the room, so it's possible the roommate had left clothes, which Jack had burned to see what he was doing in the night.
Mary's funeral was attended by thousands of people. Her family was unable to be located, but again, her funeral was paid for, so she did have services. Joseph Barnett was interrogated for 4 hours, but was cleared and released. Throughout the years, the original Jack the Ripper police documents, called the Whitechapel Murder File, have gone missing. People pretending to research took the papers and sold the information. Others took the documents to copy them, then simply never returned them. The Whitechapel Murder File breaks down the details of murders from 1888 to 1891. There are the 5 canonical murders, but possibly up to 11 deaths could be connected to Jack the Ripper. 2 murders may have occurred prior to Polly Nichols and are included in the Whitechapel Murder File.
Emma Elizabeth Smith was murdered on April 3, 1888. She was a 45-year-old sex worker that was known to drink and fight. Not much else is known about her except she was widowed 10 or so years earlier. Between 4 or 5 a.m. on April 2nd, Emma stumbled into a lodging house. Her face was bleeding, her ear had almost been cut off, and she was bleeding from the lower part of her body. She was taken to the London hospital, and some horrifying details started to emerge. She had been walking in an alley when she was attacked by a group of 2 or 3 men. They had raped her with a blunt object, or possibly a knife. The peritoneum and other organs had been ruptured from the attack. Emma had taken the strap off her bag to stop the bleeding between her legs and walked 4 hours back to the lodging house. During that walk, she went by multiple police officers, and they didn't ask her if she needed help, even though she was clearly injured. Emma died the following day from her injuries. The murder was not reported to police until days later. The police chief actually didn't learn about it until he was reading about the story in the newspaper. While the attack does not seem like a Jack the Ripper murder, Emma was the first victim to appear in the Whitechapel Murder File.
In August 1888, the body of Martha Tabram, or Martha Turner, was found. Martha had been married with 2 sons when her husband left her due to her drinking. She dated a man named William Turner for many years, and she became commonly known as Martha Turner. William would describe his life with Martha as,
"Since she has been living with me, her character for sobriety was not good. If I gave her any money, she generally spent it in drink. In fact, it was always drink."
Wasn't William Turner the the guy in Pirates of the Caribbean.
Will Turner,
yeah. That's funny. William and Martha sold little trinkets. William was a carpenter, but when money became tight, Martha would supplement their income with prostitution. This is what Martha was doing on the evening of August 6th. Martha and another sex worker had met up with a pair of soldiers, presumably for sex. The two split off onto a street named George's Yard. At the time, the street was known to be incredibly dangerous. The East London Advertiser said George's Yard was one of the most dangerous streets in the locality. For Martha, it was dark and provided some privacy. At 4:45 a.m. on August 7th, Martha's body would be discovered. Martha had been stabbed 39 times from her throat to her lower abdomen, possibly with a bayonet or similar knife. A police investigation tracked down the other woman Martha had been with that night, named Polly. Polly would name 2 soldiers, but nothing came from attempting to find the 2 soldiers. Like the other attacks, people were around, but no one heard a sound. Officers at the time definitely considered Martha to have been a Jack the Ripper victim.
It's possible that the attack was different as it was the first murder occurring August 7th, with Polly Nichols being the next attack on August 24th.
And just to be clear, Martha's friend Polly was not Polly Nichols.
No, not the same Polly, just somebody else that also went by the name Polly. The next attack in the Whitechapel murder file is that of Rose Milett. The newspaper called this murder the Return of the Ripper, but there aren't many similarities in Rose's murder and the Canonical Five. Rose was strangled with a cord from behind on December 20th, 1888. The Star newspaper worked the public into another Jack the Ripper panic, but there was no mutilation or anything else to link Rose to Jack.
Rose and Jack. Titanic.
I thought that too. We just have all the movie references in this episode.
Absolutely.
Almost a year after the first Jack the Ripper murder, another murder occurred on July 17, 1889. The body of Alice Mackenzie was found at 12:50 a.m. by Police Constable Walter Andrews. Alice's skirt had been pulled up, and there was a zigzag cut from the left breast to her belly button. A clay pipe was found near her body. Alice was known as Clay Pipe Alice because she smoked a lot of tobacco from her clay pipe. The doctors at the time seemed split 50-50 on if this was a Jack the Ripper murder. Though her wounds were not severe like the other murders, she was still murdered by someone.
In September 1889, the torso of a woman was found in the area close to Liz Stride's murder. The woman's torso was missing the head and legs. The body has never been identified. This is another stretch for the Jack the Ripper murder, assuming he would have changed his MO with this attack as well. There was no mutilation other than the removal of the head and limbs. The remains were buried in the East London cemetery with a metal plate reading,
"This case contains the body of a woman unknown, found in Pinchin Street, St. George in the East, 10th September 89.
The final victim to be included in the police Whitechapel murder file was Frances Cole. Her body was found at 2:15 a.m. on February 13, 1891. She was found in a pool of blood due to 2 cuts to her throat that ran from ear to ear.
Frances's body was identified by her father. It was soon discovered that Frances had been with a client, James Thomas Sadler, 2 days earlier on February 11th. Thomas was a seaman that met up with Frances for a drink after docking in London. Thomas and Frances were both very drunk when he was attacked and mugged in a street. Thomas became very upset because Frances had not helped him and they went their separate ways. It's also possible that Thomas thought Frances might have set him up for the mugging. Frances would be last seen with a violent client at 1:45 a.m. Another sex worker had been punched in the face by this client and she tried to warn Frances, but Frances for whatever reason still left with the man. Thomas was accused of Frances's murder, and for a second, it looked like he might be charged with all of the Whitechapel murders. The case against Thomas was that he was lying about being mugged, but had instead stayed with Frances and murdered her. This fell apart when Thomas was able to prove that he had been mugged. He had also been at sea at the time of some of the other Whitechapel murders.
At the time, Jack was thought to be a medical practitioner due to the mutilations in complete or near darkness. Butcher and midwife were also possible occupations. The newspapers portrayed him wearing a top hat with a black bag, but this would have stood out in the very poor London East End. The black bag portion is possible because witnesses who saw Elizabeth Stride with a man before her death said he was carrying a package or bag. We could do an entire episode just on the suspects alone, but we've broken down a couple. Montague John Druitt, known as MJ Druitt, was 31 years old and came from a good family when he suddenly disappeared in November 1888. MJ had lost his job, and by the time his brother heard about it, MJ was missing. His body was pulled from the Thames on December 31st. MJ had left a letter saying that he thought he was going to be like his mother and then committed suicide. His mother had been declared insane the previous July.
MJ was considered a suspect by his own family due to his deteriorating mental health. The murders also stopped after his death. The next suspect is a man named Dr. Stanley. There isn't much actual evidence to back up this suspect, and Stanley is a fictitious name. Dr. Stanley was a vigilante whose son had contracted syphilis from Mary Kelly. Stanley's son had died 2 years after his fling with Mary, and Dr. Stanley had killed sex workers until he finally tracked down Mary. There's a bit wrong with this suspect, as most cases of syphilis took 10 to 20 years before the patient died. We also don't know why Dr. Stanley is a fictitious name. Doesn't seem like it's a very legitimate suspect.
One of the most famous Jack the Ripper suspects is Prince Albert Victor. Known as Eddie, he was the grandson of Queen Victoria, and the theory is that the royals covered up his deeds. Prince Eddie was considered backwards and described as a gleaming goldfish in a crystal bowl. Eddie died in 1892 during a flu epidemic, which could have been another reason that the murders stopped. Royal records confirmed that Eddie was not in London at the time of the attacks. Our next suspect you might remember from the murder of Polly Nichols. Charles Cross was the man on his way to work that found Polly's body. In 2012, researchers started to look at Charles and his statements a little closer. Charles said that he had stopped in the middle of the road when he saw something in the road. Our other witness, Robert Paul, said that Charles was standing right beside the body when Robert walked up. Turns out Charles also gave police a false name, and his real name was Charles Lechmere. The other 4 murders also occurred on his route to work or nearby his mother's house. It's possible that Charles was Jack the Ripper and is considered one of the top suspects.
The final suspect was allegedly confirmed to be Jack the Ripper in 2025 by DNA. Aaron Kosminski was a 23-year-old barber in 1888. He also had a strong hatred for women and sex workers. Aaron was written down simply as Kosminski in the Whitechapel murder file, but he was a suspect clear back to the 1880s. Aaron was committed to the Conley Hatch Lunatic Asylum in February 1891, and if you remember, this was the same time that our possible last victim, Francis Cole, was murdered. Upon entering the asylum, Aaron was described as,
"He goes about the streets and picks up bits of bread from the gutter and eats them. He drinks water from a standpipe and refuses food at the hands of others. He is very dirty and will not be washed."
Aaron was considered insane for 2 years prior to entering the asylum. He lived in the asylum for 30 years, dying at the age of 54 in 1919. Witnesses reported a 30 to 40-year-old man being with the women, but Aaron was only in his 20s. I'm not sure I put too much weight on the age, as he was always described in a hat of some type, and everyone comments about how dark it was.
Jack the Ripper was also described as dressed in a very high-fashioned or sophisticated. But remember the one witness said he had a dark mustache with sandy eyelashes? How would anyone be able to see sandy eyelashes in the dark like that?
I agree. With a hat, and it was pouring rain, and they're in a doorway.
Yeah, impossible.
That's what I would think too.
Like, I can't even see sandy eyelashes in the daytime.
Right? Aaron does resemble the person seen on Mitre Square on the day that Catherine Eddowes was murdered.
Though DNA was non-existent in 1888, a shawl believed to belong to Catherine Eddowes was found to have Aaron's and Catherine's DNA on it. The reliability of the DNA evidence is under review as the shawl is thought to be Catherine's, but it hasn't been confirmed. It's also possible that Aaron was a client of Catherine's, and that's how his DNA got on the clothing. The family of Aaron Kosminski and Catherine Eddowes have petitioned to reopen the murder investigation.
I really think that Aaron is our guy. There's just too many coincidences. Time will tell, and we'll keep you updated on any updates with the DNA testing.
Okay, so here's my theory. Jack the Ripper was either a car man / delivery driver, whatever you want to call it, or a medical student. With the car man, it makes me think he was able to maneuver to places and find his victims, but then able to disguise himself right away as a delivery man. And with him being a medical student, that would make sense with his fascination and knowledge of the anatomy and intestines.
Or maybe he's both.
Ooh, it's probably both.
It's getting deep over here. We know that Jack was educated, so medical student would make perfect sense. Or doctor. The carman theory brings you back to Charles Cross, though.
Mm-hmm. I thought that before, like at the very beginning, I'm like, it's got to be one of those two men. I feel like it's just got to be. It's got to be one of them. I could be wrong.
And I understand that you're late for work, but to just pull down her skirt and just hustle on your way and hope you find a police officer, like that's a really terrible thing to do.
Yeah.
When we started this research, I thought Jack the Ripper was going to be a corrupted clip, but I now see why ripperologists spend their lives and money trying to solve these murders.
That's the first time I've heard that. Ripperologist.
Ripperologist?
Yeah.
It's a thing. Their entire lives spent trying to figure out who Jack is.
Well, he's dead now. Avi.
Yeah, but who is he? I fell into a complete rabbit hole here. Hours and hours of research into this. I have some pretty cool book recommendations for anyone wanting to dive in further. Jack the Ripper by Mark Whitehead and Miriam Rivet provides 160 pages of summaries of the event.
Dang.
I really enjoyed The Complete Jack the Ripper by Donald Rumbelow more, though. This book is a little over 300 pages, and it really got into the nitty-gritty of the suspects and life in the East End.
I know one thing, though. His name was probably not Jack.
Nope.
It's just a typical name, Jack.
I think his name was probably Aaron.
I think his name was probably Charles Cross.
Maybe we'll find out if DNA testing actually comes through and they reopen the investigation.
Yeah, and we'll give everyone an update, because, man, this one kept me up at night.
It definitely did. And we want to hear from you. Who is your top suspect? Is it somebody we listed here? Is it somebody we didn't? Send us an email, leave us a comment on whatever platform you're listening to. We would love to dig into it more with you.
Do you have the inside scoop of Jack the Ripper?
If so, send that to corruptpod@gmail.com. We would love for you to become part of the Corrupt crew. You can find us on Patreon with multiple tiers and PayPal. This will score you our appreciation and will announce your name in a future episode. Both links are in the episode notes. Case suggestions and feedback can be emailed to us at corruptpod@gmail.com.
The sources for this episode would be listed in the episode notes. You can find us on Instagram, Facebook, and Threads. Don't forget to subscribe to catch our new Corrupt content. Please also leave us a review wherever you're listening to this episode. Bye.
Bye.